The acrid smoke burned Corporal Jarin Holt's throat as he stumbled through the valley of twisted metal and shattered dreams. His unit's retreat had turned into a rout, leaving him separated and alone among the wreckage of what had once been a thriving settlement. The biomask covering his face wheezed with each labored breath, its filtration system struggling against the toxic atmosphere that had claimed so many lives. Jaren's engineering training kicked in as he surveyed the devastation. Crashed transports lay scattered like broken toys, their hulls split open to reveal the delicate machinery within. Some still smoldered, sending pillars of poisonous smoke into the pale sky. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the whistle of wind through twisted metal and the distant rumble of departing ships. His comm unit crackled with static, the signal too weak to reach command. Standard protocol dictated that he should continue toward the extraction point, but something made him pause. A sound barely audible over the wind-low rhythmic pattern that seemed almost like breathing. Labored, desperate breathing. Jaren's field medic instincts overrode his soldier's training. Following the sound, he picked his way carefully through the debris field, his boots crunching on scattered glass and metal fragments. The breathing grew stronger, more urgent, and he realized it wasn't human. Behind the twisted wreckage of a Velari transport. He found her. The alien warrior lay pinned beneath a section of hull plating, her pale green skin marked with cuts and bruises. Her distinctive red curls were matted with blood, and her breathing came in short, desperate gasps. What caught Jaren's attention immediately was her face, or rather, what remained of her biomask. The breathing apparatus had been shattered, leaving her exposed to the toxic air that would slowly burn her lungs from the inside. VLARI, the species that had fought humanity for decades before the fragile ceasefire. Even now, the alliance was more political necessity than genuine peace. Every human soldier had been trained to recognize them, to treat them as reluctant allies at best. But as her eyes found his large, golden, and filled with a pain that transcended species, Jaren saw something else entirely. He saw someone dying. "Hold on," he whispered, though she likely couldn't understand his words. The universal translator in his comm unit was damaged, leaving them with only the most basic communication. Jaren quickly assessed her injuries. The hull plating was too heavy for him to lift alone, but that wasn't the immediate problem. Her breathing was becoming more labored by the second, her golden eyes beginning to lose focus. The toxic atmosphere was working its way into her system, and without a functioning biomask, she had minutes at most. His hands moved to his own mask, fingers trembling as he began to release the seals. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings. He would be exposing himself to the same toxins that were killing her. His training told him to preserve his own life, to continue toward extraction, to let nature take its course. But her eyes held his, and in them he saw something. That made his decision inevitable. Not just pain, but a fierce will to live, a spirit that refused to surrender even as her body failed. She was a warrior, and she deserved to die fighting, not suffocating in poison. The mask came free with a soft hiss, and Jaren immediately felt the burn of toxic air against his skin. His throat constricted, and his eyes began to water, but he pressed forward. Gently, he positioned the biomask over the Velari's face, checking the seals to ensure a proper fit. Her breathing immediately became less labored as the mask's filtration system began working on her behalf. The oxygen reserves wouldn't last long, maybe 20 minutes, but it was better than nothing. Jaren's own breathing became increasingly difficult as the toxic atmosphere assaulted his unprotected lungs. Each breath felt like swallowing fire, and his vision began to blur. But he remained beside her, one hand on her shoulder, offering what comfort he could as darkness crept in around the edges of his consciousness. The last thing he saw before falling unconscious was her golden eyes, wide with disbelief and something else, a recognition that transcended the barriers between their species, a recognition of sacrifice. Consciousness returned to Jaren like a tide, slow and overwhelming. His first sensation was warmth, not the burning heat of toxic air, but a gentle enveloping comfort that seemed to seep into his very bones. His second was the sound of humming, a low melodic pattern that resonated strangely in his chest. Opening his eyes proved difficult. They felt heavy, as if weighted down by sleep that had lasted days. When he finally managed it, the world swam into focus in shades of blue and silver he'd never seen before. The ceiling above him curved organically, like the inside of a seashell, and soft bioluminescent strips provided gentle illumination. You wake. The voice was melodic, accented in ways that made standard sound like music. I began to fear the healing pod had failed. Jaren turned his head, motion that sent waves of dizziness through him, and found himself looking at the Velari warrior he had saved. She sat beside his bed, no longer broken and dying, but very much alive. Her pale green skin had regained its luminous quality, and her red curls fell in neat waves around her shoulders. But it was her eyes that captured him, those same golden orbs that had held his as he'd given her his mask. He began, his voice coming out as barely a whisper. His throat felt raw, as if he'd been screaming for hours. Alive, thanks to you. She leaned forward, and he caught a scent like ocean breeze and starlight. I am Rayatesh, commander of the Velari Honor Guard's 3rd Division. And you, Corporal Jaren Holt, have done something extraordinary. The mention of his name surprised him. How do you, your identification tags, and your military records? We had to verify your identity when we brought you here. She gestured around them. This is a Velari medical facility. Neutral territory technically, though few humans have ever been treated here. Jaren tried to sit up, but Rayatesh placed a gentle hand on his chest, keeping him down. Her touch was warm, and he noticed that her hands, like his, had 5 fingers, though hers were longer, more elegant. Rest. You nearly died from atmospheric poisoning. Your sacrifice. She paused, and he saw something profound in her expression. Among my people, the sharing of breath is sacred. It is how we bond, how we pledge our deepest truths. What you did, giving me your life's breath, without knowing my name, without knowing if I was friend or enemy, this is unprecedented. I couldn't just let you die, Jaren said simply. Rayatesh's eyes widened. You speak of it as if it were nothing. But in our culture, breath shared freely creates a life bond. You are now connected to me in ways that have no translation in your language. She stood and moved to a small alcove, returning with a cup of something that steamed and smelled faintly of herbs. Drink this. It will help your throat heal. As he sipped the warm liquid, Jaren studied her. She moved with the fluid grace he'd heard all Velari possessed. But there was something else, a careful attention to his comfort that seemed to go beyond medical duty. This life bond, he said finally, what does it mean? Rayatesh settled back into her chair, and for the first time since he'd awakened, she seemed uncertain. Traditionally, it means we are connected for life, that your well-being is my responsibility, as mine is yours. But this is ... unusual. Life bonds are typically formed between Velari as part of mating ceremonies or deep friendships. And now? Now I find myself bound to a human who saved my life without thought for his own. She met his eyes. My people are reconflicted about this. Some see it as an honor. Others view it as a contamination of our traditions. Jaren set down the cup, feeling strength slowly returning to his limbs. And what do you see it as? Rayatesh was quiet for a long moment, her golden eyes studying his face as if trying to memorize every detail. I see it as a gift, she said finally. A chance to understand something I never thought possible. What's that? That perhaps the breath of life flows the same in all beings, regardless of the body that contains it. Outside the curved walls of the medical facility, Jaren could hear the sounds of a world in recovery, the hum of machinery, the distant voices of beings going about their daily lives. But in this small room, surrounded by the gentle glow of Velari technology, and the presence of a woman who was both alien and achingly familiar, he felt something shift inside him. The war might be over, but something new was beginning. 3 weeks had passed since Jaren's awakening, and the Velari medical facility had become an unlikely sanctuary. Each day brought new revelations as he and Rayatesh navigated the complexities of their unprecedented bond. His strength had returned, but leaving seemed impossible, not because of his physical condition, but because of the invisible threads that seemed to connect him to the woman who had become his constant companion. The Council of Breath grows impatient, Rayatesh said as she entered his room, her usual graceful composure marred by tension. They demand answers about the human in our sacred halls. Jaren looked up from the datapad he'd been reading Velari. Cultural texts that Rayatesh had provided to help him understand the magnitude of what had occurred between them. What kind of answers? Whether you are an asset or a threat. Whether our bond should be honored or severed. She sat heavily in the chair beside his bed, a gesture so unlike her usual fluid movements that it spoke volumes about her stress. Severed? How would they, Jaren began, then stopped as he saw her expression. That's not a metaphorical severing, is it? The life bond can be broken, but the process is traumatic, and there are those who believe the only way to cleanse the contamination is through more permanent means. Her golden eyes met his. There have been whispers of exile, or worse. Jaren reached for her hand without thinking, and was surprised when she didn't pull away. Her skin was warm, slightly cooler than human normal, but not unpleasantly so. This is because of me, because I saved you. Because you are human, she corrected. Our species may have a ceasefire, but trust is still fragile. Many Velari see your presence here as proof that humans cannot be trusted to respect boundaries. Then I should leave. No. The word came out sharper than she intended, and Rayatesh looked as surprised by her vehemence as he was. I mean, the bond makes separation difficult, painful even. And she trailed off, her hand tightening around his. You what? I find myself reluctant to lose the one being in the universe who knows my name and chose to save me anyway. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither had fully explored. Jaren studied her face, noting the way her breathing had quickened, the slight flush that colored her pale green skin. Rayatesh, he said softly, and watched her eyes flutter closed at the sound of her name on his lips. My people have a saying, she whispered. That name spoken in gratitude become prayers. That prayers spoken with breath shared become truth. What? Truth? She opened her eyes, and in them he saw vulnerability that took his breath away. That perhaps the greatest bonds are forged not in ceremony, but in moments when we choose to see past the surface to the soul beneath. Before either could. Second-guessed the moment, Jaren brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. Her breath caught audibly, and he felt the tremor that ran through her. Is this appropriate? He asked, suddenly aware that he was navigating cultural waters he didn't fully understand. Nothing about our situation is appropriate by traditional standards, Rayatesh replied, but she made no move to pull away. But appropriateness has never been what saved lives or built bridges between worlds. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime, and Rayatesh reluctantly withdrew her hand to activate a communication panel. The holographic image that appeared showed another Velari, this one older with silver threading through his dark hair. Commander Rayatesh, the figure said formally. The council requires your immediate presence, and you are to bring the human. Understood, Elder Thanavel, she replied, her professional mask sliding back into place. The communication ended, leaving them in tense silence. It's time, she said simply as they prepared to leave the sanctuary of the medical facility. Jaren found himself wondering if this would be the last time they would be alone together. The weight of their impossible situation pressed down on him, two beings from different worlds, bound by an act of desperation that had somehow become something deeper. Rhea Tesh, he said as they reached the door. Yes, whatever happens in there, I want you to know I don't regret giving you my breath. I'd do it again. Her smile, when it came, was radiant enough to power the bioluminescent walls around them. And I would gladly receive it, knowing what I know now. What do you know now? That some bonds are worth fighting for, even when the whole universe says they're impossible. The council chamber was a marvel of Valari architecture, a vast dome that seemed to breathe with living light, its walls rippling with patterns that responded to the emotions of those within. As Jaren entered beside Rhaetesh, he felt the weight of dozens of golden eyes upon him, some curious, others openly hostile. Elder Thanavel stood at the center of the chamber, his presence commanding despite his slight frame. Around him, other council members formed a semicircle, their ceremonial robes flowing like water in an unfelt breeze. Corporal Jaren Holt, Thanavel's voice carried easily through the space. You stand before the Council of Breath, accused of contaminating our most sacred traditions. How do you answer? Jaren had rehearsed this moment, but standing here among beings whose culture he barely understood, the prepared words seemed inadequate. I saved a life, he said simply. If that's contamination, then I'm guilty. Murmurs rippled through the assembly, some approving, others decidedly not. Thanavel raised a hand for silence. Commander Rhaetesh, he continued, you bear responsibility for this situation. The human claims ignorance of our ways, but you know better. Yet you have not sought to dissolve the bond. Why? Rhaetesh stepped forward, her chin raised in defiance. Because the bond is sacred, regardless of the species involved. Jaren Holt gave his breath freely, without expectation or knowledge of our customs. That makes his sacrifice purer than any ceremonial bonding. Heresy, hissed one of the younger council members. Humans cannot understand the deeper meanings, can they not? Rhaetesh's voice cut through the objection. This human understood enough to choose my life over his own. He understood enough to stay by my side as he lost consciousness, offering comfort in my darkest moment. If that is not the essence of our breath bond traditions, then perhaps we have forgotten what those traditions truly mean. The chamber erupted in heated discussion, voices rising in multiple dialects of Valari. Jaren found himself overwhelmed by the musical cacophony, but Rhaetesh moved closer to him, her presence steadying. Whatever they decide, she whispered, know that I stand with you. Thanavel called for order, his authority finally quieting the assembly. There is another matter, he announced, his tone grave. Intelligence reports suggest that hardline factions in both human and Valari space are using this situation as evidence that the ceasefire was a mistake. There are calls for renewed hostilities. Jaren felt his blood run cold. Because of us? Because of what you represent, Thanavel confirmed. A blurring of lines that many prefer to keep distinct. Your presence here, Commander Rhaetesh's protection of you, it threatens those who profit from division. Then we'll leave, Jaren said immediately. I'll return to human space, and Rhaetesh can know. Rhaetesh's interruption was sharp. Final. The bond cannot be simply ignored. Separation over such distances, especially now when it's still new, would cause significant trauma to both of us. What kind of trauma? Jaren asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know. Physical pain, emotional instability, potentially permanent psychological damage, Fanivel answered. The life bond, once formed, creates neural pathways that resist separation. It is why such bonds were traditionally formed only after careful consideration and preparation. The weight of their situation settled over Jaren like a heavy blanket. They were trapped between warring cultures, bound by something neither had chosen, but both had come to value, facing separation that could destroy them or togetherness that might destroy the peace between their species. There is a possibility, Fanivel said slowly, a precedent from our ancient texts. In times of great upheaval, bonded pairs have sometimes served as bridges between conflicting groups. Ambassadors of understanding, if you will. You're suggesting we become symbols, Rayatesh said. I'm suggesting you become proof that understanding is possible. That evening, in a guest quarters far from the medical facility, Jaren and Rayatesh sat in contemplative silence. The day's events had left them both emotionally drained, but also strangely closer. The external pressure seemed to have crystallized something between them that had been building since his awakening. Are you afraid? Rayatesh asked, her voice soft in the dim lighting. Terrified, Jaren admitted, but not of what they might do to us. I'm afraid of what happens if we can't make this work, if our bond becomes the reason for more conflict instead of less. She moved from her chair to sit beside him on the low couch, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Among my people, fear shared is fear halved. And what about other things? Are they halved too, or doubled? That depends on what we're sharing. The question hung between them, laden with possibilities. Slowly, carefully, Jaren reached up to touch her face, his fingers tracing the delicate line of her cheekbone. Her skin was silk soft, and she leaned into his touch with a small sound that went straight to his core. Jaren, she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. Is this real? He asked. Or just the bond making us feel things that aren't there? Does it matter? She replied, her hand covering his where it rested against her cheek. What I feel when I look at you, when you speak my name, when you touch me, it's real to me. Whether it comes from the bond or from something deeper, it's real. He leaned forward, and she met him halfway, their lips touching in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deeper as she pressed closer. She tasted like starlight and promises, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The council, your people, the political implications, Jaren began, can wait until tomorrow, Rayatesh finished. Tonight, there is only this, only us. In the soft glow of Velari technology, two beings from different worlds discovered that some bridges are built not with words or trees, but with touches that transcend species, with breaths shared in moments of perfect understanding. 6 months after that first desperate breath in the wreckage, Jaren stood before a joint assembly of human and Velari diplomats. Beside him, Rayatesh radiated calm confidence, though he could feel the tension in her through their bond, a connection that had grown stronger and more nuanced with each passing day. The integration protocol, Admiral Chun was saying, his weathered face skeptical as he reviewed the proposal on his datapad, is unprecedented. Joint colonies, mixed crews, shared technologies. It sounds idealistic at best, dangerous at worst. With respect, Admiral, Jaren replied. 6 months ago, you would have said a human Velari life bond was impossible. Yet here we stand. Around the circular conference table, representatives from both species murmured among themselves. The past months had been a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and carefully orchestrated public appearances. Jaren and Rayatesh had become living proof that cooperation was possible, their bond serving as a bridge between worlds that had been locked in conflict for decades. Ambassador Shin, The senior Velari diplomat leaned forward. "A preliminary integration trials have shown promising results. The Joint Research Station at Kepler 442b has exceeded all productivity projections, and conflict incidents have dropped to nearly zero." "Because they're being watched," Admiral Chun countered. "Put people in the spotlight, and they behave differently." "No." Rhayatesh spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived the reality they were discussing. "Because they're choosing to see each other as individuals rather than representatives of their species. It's remarkable what becomes possible when you stop thinking of someone as the enemy and start thinking of them as a person with hopes, fears, and dreams not so different from your own." Jaren felt a surge of pride through their bond, followed by something warmer, more intimate. Even after all these months, Rayatesh's ability to cut through political rhetoric and speak simple truths still amazed him. "The vote will be close," Admiral Chun admitted. "There are factions on both sides that prefer the status quo. War is profitable for some, and peace requires change that not everyone welcomes. Change is coming, whether they welcome it or not." Elder Fanivel interjected from his position across the table. "The question is whether we guide that change or let it happen chaotically." The meeting continued for several more hours, but Jaren found his attention drifting to the woman beside him. Through their bond, he could sense her thoughts, not specific words, but emotions and impressions that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. She was thinking about the future, about the life they were building together against all odds. Later, in their shared quarters aboard the diplomatic station, they stood together on the observation deck, watching the stars wheel slowly past the transparent aluminum windows. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day?" Rayatesh asked, leaning against his side. Jaren wrapped his arms around her, marveling as he always did at how perfectly she fit against him. "I try not to. Some possibilities are too terrible to contemplate." "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "Not just my death, but all the things that never would have been. This bond, these negotiations, the hope for real peace between our peoples, none of it would exist." "Butterfly effect," Jaren murmured. "One small action changing the course of history. Is that what we are? A small action?" He turned her in, his arm so he could see her face, noting the way the starlight played across her features. "We're proof that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest decisions. You were dying. I had the means to help. Everything else grew from that moment." Rayatesh smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. "Among my people, we have a saying, from a single breath, entire worlds are born." "I like that," Jaren said, leaning down to kiss her softly. "What worlds do you think we're creating?" "Ones where children grow up never knowing that they're parents. We're supposed to be enemies, where the color of someone's skin or the shape of their eyes doesn't determine their worth. Where breath shared freely becomes the foundation for something beautiful." A soft chime indicated an incoming message, and Rayatesh reluctantly pulled away to check the communication panel. Her expression brightened as she read the display. "The vote passed," she announced. "Not unanimously, but by a significant margin. The integration protocol is officially approved." Jaren felt a surge of elation, followed immediately by trepidation. So it begins, she agreed. "Are you ready to help build a new world?" He pulled her close again, breathing in the scent that had become home to him, ocean breeze and starlight, with undertones that were uniquely, wonderfully hers. "With you, I'm ready for anything." Outside their window, the stars continued their ancient dance, witnesses to the small miracle of two hearts, beating in harmony across the vast divide between species. In the distance, construction lights flickered around the framework of what would become the first true integration colony, a place where human and Velari children would play together, where scientists would collaborate on discoveries that neither species could achieve alone, where love would be measured not by similarity, but by the courage to embrace difference. It had all started with a single breath, freely given. Now, as Charon and Rhayatesh stood together planning their future, they knew that breath had become the wind that would carry two civilizations toward a destiny neither could have imagined alone. The war was over. The peace was just beginning. And somewhere in the space between what was and what could be, love had taken root and begun to bloom.